What is up, you guys? Glitchiz here, and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm bringing you probably the strongest build that I've ever made in the game, and it is using the new Primal Rage SMG. It might be my new favorite build that I've made thus far. It does insane damage, and I can't wait to get into the details and share the build with you guys. It also, surprisingly, despite being at 1 HP pretty much at all times with this weapon, is actually really tanky. We're using some defensive mods to give us some extra shields, so the survivability is actually really good as well. And I actually have a public event starting right at my base, so let me exit out of this and then we'll jump right into the build. Catch you guys here in a second. All right, we're back. I had to jump out of that public event, but back to the build. What I wanted to go over first is obviously the weapons. So our main weapon, again, is going to be the Primal Rage SMG, and how this gun works is it has a 35% chance of gaining a stack of Fast Gunner. And for those of you that don't know what Fast Gunner is, if we go here and click on it, is the way it works is when the skill is in effect, each stack of Fast Gunner that we get will grant plus 1% fire rate and plus 1% flat attack, which is good because the flat attack variable goes across all damage multipliers in your build. It's not just a single one-off multiplier like status damage and things like that. And the effect can stack up to 5 times, which can actually further be enhanced with some of the mod choices that you can pick. So that is how Fast Gunner works. But the way the weapon itself works is it has 35% chance to gain a stack of Fast Gunner on hit. And when the magazine has 1 bullet left, 1% of your max HP can be spent and as spare ammo and consumed to continue firing the weapon. So long story short, you can fire this weapon indefinitely, almost like an LMG. It's honestly better than an LMG. You can pretty much fire forever and you never have to reload. You can't drop below 1 HP. So again, you can never die by firing this weapon. It'll just bring you down to the bare minimum, and then you'll just fire infinitely. Each hit will restore HP equal to 0.1% the amount of Fast Gunner stacks that you have. So depending on how fast your fire rate is and how many stacks you have, you will get a little bit of a health regen over time by firing the gun as well. And then lastly, every 1% HP change has a 1% weapon damage boost that lasts for 5 seconds, and each stack duration is independent up to 80%. So that is a huge weapon damage boost that you're going to be getting with this weapon that's just built in innately into the weapon features. So really, really strong. I have it calibrated maxed out and it's at 6 stars. So we're going to be getting a bunch of bonus damage from that as well. And then for the weapon calibration, what I would recommend is a gold assault style. You get 20% bonus attack at the cost of 50 accuracy and 25% mag capacity. Because we'll be firing infinitely using our health, the mag capacity is not going to be that big of a deal. It's pretty much negligible because we're never going to be reloading. And then the accuracy, we're going to balance that out with some of the accessories that we put on the gun. So let's go and check that out next. So for the accessories, I take multi-break for the muzzle, compact reflex sight, the tactical laser, and then the blue magazine. And the reason you want the blue magazine is because you want to try and get to 1 bullet as quickly as possible. So the less ammunition, the better. Plus, with the amended SMG mag, you actually get increased accuracy, which again will sort of counteract that negative 50 accuracy that we get from our calibration. So that's why the blue mag is actually the best one for this gun. So I run that, and then I'll be running tungsten ammunition for the combat demo. Moving on to the mod, I'm going to be running the Shootout Violent variation. You could run the Fast Gunner variation as well, but this will give increased crit damage guaranteed because of the Violent variation, and ideally you would have some bonus weapon damage and potentially damage to great ones. I don't have an amazing version of this mod, so this is one of the few that I do want to upgrade, but even with some of my not optimized mods, this build still does a ton of damage, as you will see. But what Shootout does is when triggering Fast Gunner, your weapon damage is increased by plus 1.5% for 10 seconds, and that can stack up to 20 times. So that is a bunch of bonus weapon damage there that you're getting from this mod. And then moving on, for the secondary weapon, you obviously want to run a bingo or not a bingo, a bullseye weapon, and you have 3 choices: the bingo sniper rifle, the wildfire pistol, or the recurve crossbow. What I found in this particular build, normally I like to run the wildfire. This weapon does so much damage that I was melting through enemies insanely fast and almost never took my wildfire pistol out to mark targets. The only time I was ever really doing that was against bosses, and if you're only using it against bosses, then you're going to want to just do it for the max damage and max DPS that you can get. And in this case, the crossbow will do that. When you combo this with the vulnerability amplifier mod, that will make your bullseye effect cause an 18% boost in damage to enemies that get marked instead of only 8, or 16% instead of only 8. And the recurve crossbow is the only weapon, if we go to weapon features, that gives an additional plus 15% crit rate on marked targets as well, which will make our primal rage weapon do even more damage on top of it once we switch over. So all the other weapons like bingo and wildfire, that only does the bullseye buff. This one does bullseye and gives you 15% additional crit rate, which is really, really strong. So for the few times I'm going to be using it or against like a boss, things like that, I would recommend the recurve crossbow. For the melee weapon, honestly, don't use it that much, but I prefer the long axe for the Fortress Warfare buff. For those of you that don't know, Fortress Warfare, how it works is on a heavy swing, you will create a ring area of effect on the ground. In this case, it's a 2-meter radius, and it will grant you and all of your allies standing in that radius super armor, which basically gives you another 20% bonus weapon damage for 5 seconds. And I combo that with the portable territory mod, which will extend the status of Fortress Warfare for an additional 2 seconds after the duration ends. So it just gives that extra bonus buff a little bit longer of a duration. That being said, again, I don't really use this in my combos. The weapon itself just does so much damage that trying to get that full combo off isn't really necessary. If it's a boss, I use the crossbow and then switch to it, but that's about it. That's really all you need. And then maybe your deviation. So those are the weapons and the accessories and the mods that I would recommend for the weapons. Moving on to the gear. A lot of mistakes that I've been seeing players make, and especially videos make, and I tested this out myself as well, is you tried going like a full crit build using Lone Wolf and things like that, something you would do in other fast gunner builds. But with this particular build, what I found is because you don't really have to worry about reloading, and you want to get as much damage bonuses that you can based off your health, the best armor choice in this case is actually going to be the Treacherous Tide set. And in my instance, I prefer the 4-piece set. So with 1 piece, you're going to be getting a 10% weapon damage reduction bonus. So that'll make us a little bit more tankier, give us some bonus defense. Second piece bonus when HP is below 70%, which we will always be with this gun. Your weapon damage and status damage is increased by an additional 12%. The third perk is when your HP reduction from low sanity is decreased by 40, which again should be all the time. Your weapon and status damage goes up by another 10% again, and further increases as your sanity drops up to a total of 28% at a max of 30% sanity. And then last but not least, the fourth perk is it generates a shield equal to 20% your max HP when your HP is below 40%. This is important in comparison with the Lone Wolf set combination. For example, you could potentially get a little bit more damage with Lone Wolf. However, what I found was you tended to get one shot a lot because you're always going to be at 1 HP, and all it will take is one enemy just nicking you and you're going to get down instantaneously. With the Treacherous Tide set, because we're always going to be at 1 HP pretty much, we are going to have a 20% max HP shield bar that's going to be above our health at all times. That will sort of mitigate 2 to 3 hits before we even start taking damage to our normal health. So that will save us 99.9% of the times from getting one shot by anything and kind of negate the downside of being at 1 HP. So that's why Treacherous Tides is really, really strong. And we're going to have the Treacherous Tides helmet, gloves, boots, and legs. And then for the mask, you can pretty much run whatever you want here. I personally went with the shelter mask for the extra status damage reduction for a little bit more survivability. There's really no point in running anything else because things like Blackstone just gives cold and heat resistance. That might be good on a Way of Winter scenario, but not really good on Manibus. You do something like Renegade, that just gives you reload speed. don't need that either because we're going to be firing infinitely with this build. So there wasn't really that many other good options for the off piece. So I just went with more survivability with in the form of some extra damage reduction. So that's why we're running that for the mask. And then for the chest piece, this is important. We're going to be running the Charmed Mag Top. This is a new exotic armor piece that coincides with Fast Gunner and pretty much this weapon it works perfectly with. So we can start with that as our key armor piece when the player is in the Fast Gunner status, which we pretty much always will be with this weapon. The less ammo or magazine capacity that you have, the higher the chance of triggering an extra bullet when firing. At 1% ammo, which we pretty much always will be, the chance of triggering the extra bullet is 40%. So once you get down to that one bullet in the mag, for the rest of the time that you're firing, you have a chance of firing double rounds every time you fire a bullet at 40% chance, which just pretty much doubles the DPS that you're doing. Pretty much you're firing 2 bullets instead of 1 every single shot, which is pretty insane. It's technically a 40% chance, but we will fire insanely quick with this build, so it triggers constantly. That is the one downside with this build, is you will chew through ammunition very, very fast, but things will die very fast. So that is the upside. So now let's go into the mods. So for the helmet, I'm running the Momentum Up Lunar variation. This combo as well on the Lunar servers, obviously, but also because all the Lunar perks are based around lower HP, which this whole build revolves around. So ideally, this is going to give bonus to crit damage, bonus to great ones, and bonus to weapon damage as your Lunar sub perks. And Momentum Up in general will increase our fire rate by 10% for the first 50% of the magazine, and then the back half of the magazine will increase our weapon damage by 30%. And because we're pretty much going to be at 1 bullet the entire time, we're pretty much going to have an infinite 30% weapon damage buff at all times while firing this weapon. So that's a really, really strong perk for the helmet there. Moving on to the mask, we have the Shelterer mask, and I'm running the Blitzkrieg Violent variation. The only reason I'm running Violent is because I unfortunately don't have the Fast Gunner variant that you get from Prime Wars and things like that yet. I haven't found a good one. Ideally, you would have Fast Gunner on this because we're going to be proccing it so frequently. But Blitzkrieg in general is the one you want to go with. Fast Gunner stacks are increased by +5, so now we can get to 10, where the tooltip said it only goes up to 5. Now we can get to 10, and additional fire rate is increased further by 1% for each stack that we have. So we're not only going to be firing faster, but we're also going to be getting the weapon damage buff even more because we can get additional stacks. And then again, if you don't have the Fast Gunner perks on a Violent variation, you want crit damage, weapon damage ideally, and potentially damage to great ones. So that is the mod for the mask. Moving on to our Charmed Mag Top. This is one of the ones that I changed. I run Critical Rescue Lunar variation, ideally with crit damage, weapon damage, and damage to great ones. And what Critical Rescue does, I haven't used this on any other builds because nothing else revolves around low health, but you get 20% additional damage reduction and healing received plus 20% when your HP is below 30%, which we will always be with this build. We'll be at 1 HP pretty much. So that is just a ton of extra damage reduction that we're going to be getting, and bonus healing. So that's really, really good for survivability there. And we're kind of getting our offensive perks from our substats, which is nice. Moving on to the pants, the Treacherous Tides pants, we want to run Deadshot Violent. Each critical hit by a non-melee weapon, in this case our SMG, will grant plus 5% crit damage up to 45%. This effect is removed on the next reload, and again, we will never be reloading with this build, so that is pretty much a permanent 45% damage, crit damage buff that we're going to be getting with this perk. And then ideally, you want crit damage, damage to great ones, and weapon damage on this. So not bad substats on mine there. Moving on to the gloves, we have the Treacherous Tides gloves, and we are going to run the Critical Boost variant, in this case, Violent. This will give plus 15% crit rate to allow us to do that bonus damage with the rapid fire shots we're going to be doing more frequently. And again, same substats, crit damage, weapon damage, and damage to great ones is what you're going to want to run there. And then last but not least, for the boots, this is the first time I've ever changed this mod, but the best in slot, in my opinion, for this build is not going to be Covered Advance. It's going to be Rush Hour. And in this particular case, I'm running the Violent variant for the crit damage substat. And what Rush Hour does is every 10% HP loss will grant 4% melee weapon and status damage. So similar perk to the Covered Advance. However, Covered Advance caps at 20%, and this particular one has no cap. So because we're going to be at 1 HP, we could get 60, 70 plus percent with this particular mod because we're running at almost no health at all times. So you get a much bigger boost in stats with this particular build just because it's a low health build compared to Covered Advance. So that is what I'm running there. And even these are optimized. I have 4 more upgrades that I could put on some of these. So wait until you see the damage from the damage tests. Despite me not having fully min-max mods. It's pretty crazy. So that is all of the armor and all of the mods. Moving on to our Cradle perks. Let's go over to our Cradle. Here is what I would recommend for the Cradle perks. For the first row, at least on the Manibus server, I'm running Anti-Phase so that you get the bonus 15 damage for crossbows and SMGs, as well as Resilience when your sanity is below 30%. Damage received from Deviants is reduced by 30%, so anytime the Crimson Moon is out, the Treacherous Tides and things like that, we're going to be getting even more damage reduction there. Moving on to the second row, we want to take Tactical Combo, weapon damage plus 15% for 4 seconds after switching weapons or reloading. The reloading aspect we won't need because we never reload, but when we switch between our crossbow for the bullseye effect and then back to the Primal Rage, then that'll give us the bonus there. We also want to take Deviant Energy Defense. When summoning or handling deviations, grant an additional shield equal to 30% of your max HP. While the shield is active, your weapon damage reduction and status damage reduction also gets boosted by 10%. So anytime you summon your deviation, we're going to be getting more survivability. And then moving on, I also like to take Chaotic Thoughts for this build. When you have a whim due to low sanity, which when we're that low of health, we're going to have low sanity all the time pretty much, your damage reduction against deviants will be increased by another 10%, and the damage against deviants will be increased by 10% as well. So at nighttime, especially during Crimson Moon on hard mode servers, that 10% will be active pretty much all the time with this build. Moving on to the third row, we want Steady Hand. When you have a buff, i.e. Fortress Warfare or Fast Gunner, your weapon damage will be increased by another 10% and 25% for weak spot damage. And then lastly, Mark Strike, weapon damage or weak spot damage increased by 20% against enemies marked with the bullseye. So you hit an enemy with the crossbow, in this case probably a boss, as long as you're hitting the weak spot, that's 20% more weak spot damage that you're going to be getting, which is really nice. Fourth row we can skip, and then last but not least in the final row, you're going to want to definitely take Fast Pursuit. Upon triggering Fast Gunner, gain one of the following effects for 12 seconds at random, either 3% flat attack, 3% crit rate, or 8% crit damage up to 5 stacks. The effect is removed once switching weapons, but because we have infinite ammo, once we swap to our main one, we never have to swap back again. So we pretty much keep this buff at all times once we start triggering Fast Gunner stacks. So definitely a must-have for this build. Those are the ones I would recommend for survivability and damage. And then moving on to the deviation of choice. In my opinion, there's really only 2 options. The survivability one would be the Festering Gel variant, ideally one that would give you additional damage with its substat. But if you want offensive max damage, then the best, in my opinion, would really be the Wolf. I got lucky enough to have a level 5 skill Wolf, and if we go and talk to it, you'll see why it is so strong. We go over to my Wolf here. This is why it is so good. It is this perk right here. When a target dies, it can spawn a clone, and you get increased weapon damage received to the attack target by 43.2% at skill rating level 5. I think this drops to like 37 or 38 at skill rank 4. But either way, every time that you summon it and your dog starts attacking an enemy, that is a huge weapon damage boost that we're going to be getting. And this whole build revolves around weapon damage, and crit rate. So really big boost in damage you'll see when we summon our dog. So that is the Cradle and the Deviation. Last but not least, before we go to the damage test, I want to talk about food. There's really only one option, in my opinion, that's really good. Maybe 2. You could run the Hot Dog. If we go over here, the Hot Dog, where are you? This will increase the damage by 20% to enemies marked with a bullseye. So really good against bosses that you're using your crossbow on. But for generic flat attack for this build, the best in slot, in my opinion, is going to be Crumbly Bread, used to increase all weapon damage by 25%. So another big damage boost there. As for the drink, there's not as many good options, but the one I like to run is Miracle Tea, used to increase all of your recovery effects by 10%. And from my testing, I do believe, maybe I may be misreading this a little bit from what I saw when I had Miracle Tea, the regeneration that I was getting from the effects of the Primal Rage were increasing a little bit quicker. It may have just been a visual trick on my mind, but I think that is working properly. Correct me in the comments if I am wrong, but that should increase your healing from the Primal Rage as well. But then if that's not the one you're running, then you could just run any other hydration based item. Could do a energy drink for double jump against certain bosses is nice. Whimsical drink and the ice signature or signature ice brew isn't bad for more pollution resistance. Whimsical drink doesn't really matter in this build because we're not using status damage, so we don't use that. So the main ones for hydration, in my opinion, would be Stardust energy drink or the Miracle Tea. The main one that you pretty much want to run all the time, though, is going to definitely be the Crumbly Bread. So that is the food. So now that we are done with all of the build stuff, the only thing left to do is talk about the damage. And just to give you an idea, my Critical Pulse build, which used to be my favorite build, if you guys watched my previous video, was capping in around 50,000 to 60,000 DPS. Granted, some of my mods weren't min-maxed, but with this build, even without min-max stuff, watch the type of DPS that we do. So one thing actually that I forgot that I wanted to do this time, just to give you a really good idea, is get one of the Crumbly Breads. I haven't done a food demo in a minute here. Do I already have it on me? Where are you at? There you are. So let's go and pop our bit bread. So we got the weapon damage boost. Make sure we're hydrated here. So what I'm going to do for max DPS, this would be like an example as if I was going against a boss. I'm going to summon the dog. Then I'm immediately going to fire my recurve crossbow to trigger bullseye and get that plus 15% bonus to crit rate. And then we're immediately going to switch to our Primal Rage, which ideally will be at 1 round in the mag and at 1 HP, because the lower our health, the more damage we're going to have. So once you get to there, you never have to reload again. And as you see from our health bar, we've got the shield above. That is where that health shield comes from. But let's go ahead, summon the dog, and pop our crossbow and see what kind of damage we do. And again, remember, the crossbow build was at about 60,000 DPS. So let's see what we can do here. Let's go and summon the dog. Fire the crossbow. 140, 150, 160, 170, 180, 190. Can we hit 200,000? 192, I think we hit 194. So as you can see, it's better than an LMG. You can just literally fire forever. And we're constantly gaining health back. But we were sitting at about 190,000 DPS with this weapon. So insane amount of damage in combination with the Crumbly Bread and your Wolf. And about 3 to 4, almost 5 times the amount of damage that we were doing with the crossbow build. So by far for PvE, the strongest build in the game right now, in my opinion. You melt bosses, you melt ads like insanely quick. With the defensive perks that we're taking, we're not only still able to do a ton of DPS, as you saw, but we can still survive because of the bonus shields that we're getting. We've got almost probably 3 or 4 hits above our health bar of shield that will mitigate those initial one-shot attacks, so you don't even have to worry about instantly dying. You just fire forever and not have to worry about it. So all in all, a very, very strong build, and probably my new favorite build in the game right now. I'm having a ton of fun with it, and hopefully you guys enjoy it as well. If you did, be sure to smash that like button, comment down below. I appreciate all of your guys' feedback. Also, if you want to keep up to date with my future content, consider subscribing and turn on that notification bell. And then last but not least, if you want to join a killer community of like-minded gamers, feel free to check the links down in the description and join us on the Discord. We got over 1,000 members in there now, many of which are playing Once Human. So hopefully you jump in and we see you guys around here soon. But until the next one, hope everyone has a great day and we'll see you all later.